You are listening to Key to the Bridge, brought to you by your friends at Keystone Therapy and Training Services, where we will be sharing human stories, talking about community resources, mental health, and wellness. This is a podcast for everyone. Welcome. All right, everyone. Welcome to Key to the Bridge. I'm really excited to have my two amazing colleagues and guests here today. And we are going to kind of keep moving forward on this theme around raising kiddos and what we're doing right now in this time frame in our communities around what it looks like for the adults who are responsible for raising our amazing youth that we love so much. I'm not trying to sound sarcastic. I'm just saying that's usually how we're given that amazing responsibility, that it's a gift, which is great, but it's also really, really challenging. And so I'm really happy to have both of you here to provide your thoughts, your insights, your feelings on how we're doing this work and how we could use more resources, and your guys' perspectives coming from your guys' different backgrounds, communities, and what you're experiencing, because there's definitely some conversations that are not happening, and we need to continue talking. So I'm going to let you guys introduce yourself. Go ahead, Tré, you can go first. Tell us a little bit who you are, and you can tell us a little, whatever you'd like to tell us, where you work, how many kids you have. Give us a little bio. We'd love to know.
Great. Cool. Hello, my name is Tré Vasquez, and I am 38 years old. I live here in Sonoma County. I've been here for the past, 7 years. Prior to that, I was living in Oakland for 10 or 15 years, and then before that, I'm originally from Arizona, way down south, along the so-called U.S.-Mexico border. So I come from a mixed family, but largely our lineage is mixed indigenous and European, but I was raised culturally Chicano, so that influences who I am today, politically and culturally, spiritually, all of it. And I'm raising three kids who are boys, identified as boys now.
All right.
We leave space for however they might choose to.
We're in the we'll see phase.
Mm-hmm. And what else? I've been an organizer, a community organizer for the last 15 years or so, and worked with young people for large parts of that. Everything from, homeless youth to youth who've been systems impacted and incarcerated as young people, to youth organizing in high schools, to doing climate justice work, which is what I'm currently doing. I do economic and ecological justice work with communities of color who are seeking to create alternatives to this current extractive economy that we're in now, which also connects deeply to how I think about parenting and practice parenting as well, with a kind of a vision on how we can change the way things are now for these generations that are coming.
So Tré has all the answers. I'm excited. We're going to have all of the knowledge.
Not at all.
The knowledge. No pressure, Tré. No pressure. Can you tell us, Tré, really quick, how old your boys are?
Yeah, they are 12, 10, and 8.
All right. Excellent. All right. And go ahead, Natasha. Just remind us your name and how old your kids are and what you're doing in the work.
Wonderful. My name's Natasha. I've just started working at Keystone. I have 3 lovely children, aged 12, 9, and 5. I am new to Sonoma. I am originally Nigerian from descent, was raised in Britain, and as of 2 years ago, moved to the US. My background mainly comes from a lot of youth work back in the day, setting up youth clubs, managing youth clubs, working in the communities with families, setting up schools and nurseries. So we have some in the UK, some in Nigeria, orphanages, and then in my social work career, working mainly with fostered and adopted families and children, which involved recruiting, training, supporting, and just making sure that they have a good structure to move forward in life. Done quite a bit of work with the elderly as well, working in the area of dementia, which is what I did my thesis in, and making sure that those in that community have the support that they need and are free from abuse as well.
You guys, I love you both. It's powerhouse. It's just so great. I'm just excited to be in the space with you. And I'm continuing with the story. So May is Mother's Day. June is Father's Day in our American culture. And what I notice during this times of year is people who are responsible for raising kids, we're in a transition, right? Like the school year is coming to an end. Yay, summer, at least for sunshine. But our level of parental responsibility shifts because we don't have the school day anymore. And there's also, right, like this ending usually like of a phase or an age group with our kids, and then we're moving into a new school year. People always talk about January being the new year. Never to me. July has always felt like a new year to me because my life has been so enwrapped in youth and school being how that cycle works. And so what I have noticed lately is people raising kids are really feeling the load of the levels of responsibility around how do I raise them based on what's happening right now in the world. Like that we're very much in a place where they're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know. We've all never lived through a pandemic before. We have social media, right? Like we have all of this really not great stuff going on in our country and in the world. And so the load feels really, really heavy. And so what I would love your first thoughts on, is thinking about for yourself and what you're doing with your own kids or youth that you're working with in the community. What are you noticing, I guess, is the like one or two things that if you could like prioritize what we would want to do to support the adults supporting the youth, right? This is a conversation that we don't have very often. Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about what the youth need, but we don't really bring it back and talk about what do the adults need to support the youth. So thinking about like what are one or two things that you could see right now the adults needing to support our young people as we're dealing with where we are right now and, right, this time of year of transition, right, where we're trying to figure out how we're going to manage all these amazing humans for like, I don't know, it's like 67 days or something, or not even, it might be like 45 days. I need to count.
It feels like 60.
It feels like 67. It feels like 67. I mean, it might, I don't even know. It might be 67 because, right, June and July is 30. Yeah, it might be close. That might have been a good guess. So yeah, just your thoughts as we're kind of warming into this conversation around maybe what are some things adults could do. Either one of you could go first. Go ahead, Tré. You can go. I'll facilitate. Go ahead, Tré.
You sure? It looked like you might have something to.
No.
Okay.
Go for it. Go for it.
I'll say all the wrong things.
No, you guys are amazing.
Yeah, I think like, immediately what comes to mind for me is for me personally is what kind of tools am I continuing and practices am I continuing to hold in my life where I'm regulating, where I'm regulating my emotions and in relationship to the world around me, I feel like we're coming, I don't know if we're coming out of COVID. I think we've gone through some major transitions in the last 3 years. And I think United States culture, I don't think does a very good job of really being honest about grief and being honest about, where we are. It's kind of just like, let's keep going. And we live in this state of consumerism. And it's just, there's so much disconnection, I feel. And I feel for me it's really important to acknowledge the grief that we've been experiencing. And I'm not just talking about the last 3 years. For those of us who have survived legacies of colonization, of genocides, of enslavement, and all of these things, I think it's really important for us to be honest about these things and have tools, whatever work for you in terms of really addressing the grief that we're holding, and particularly the peak of that grief that happened in the last 3 years with this pandemic. And I feel we've kind of done a disservice, or this culture has done a disservice to our kids by acting like, oh, it's fine, we're back in school now. everything's back to normal. We can take the masks off or whatever, all of the narrative that we're experiencing. So to bring that back, I feel like for me, it's been really important to just be honest with myself and incorporate practices that are helping me to regulate every day, because we're being bombarded with messaging every day. The news is coming through, alerts on our phone, and we're desensitized to it. Now, we were just talking before we started recording about school shootings, right? It's like we're hearing about these mass shootings every other day, once a week at least, and now it's just to the point where it's like, oh, there's another one, right? And it hurts you, it affects you, but at the same time, but I gotta go do this, so.
Yeah, I gotta go to Costco.
Right.
So I can't worry about the alert on my phone.
Right.
I gotta go pick up for soccer. And just go.
Absolutely. And our kids are growing up in a generation where that is normalized, right? It's so much more so than us, right? And climate change is normalized, right? Or this crisis that we're in is normalized, and so I think it's really important for me, first and foremost, to make sure that I'm taking care of myself and incorporating these tools to manage the stress, to manage the deep emotions, in order to be present with them who are processing those things from a whole different lens, and not to say that I'm an authority on processing those things or I process them better. In fact, I often look to them and learn so much from them, from how their beautiful and innocent, raw way of processing those things as well. I think we learn as adults how to mask these things and how to be more sophisticated. I'm putting quotes on that. But I learned so much from watching them and just their raw emotions with it, and how do we also hold that in our honesty and integrity.
Yeah, I straight up threw a tantrum last week, and it felt great.
That's good.
I took a page out of 2.5-year-old land, and my amazing husband was like, "What's going on?" Well, I'm having a tantrum, and I'm gonna do it. And it felt great. I mean, you gotta move and kick and yell sometimes and get it out. But as an adult, you're not supposed to ever have a tantrum. Why would you do that? Stomping your feet? Try it. It's really great to stomp your feet. I need to do that more often. I do. I'll get it out. But you're right. Like, how do we incorporate whatever it is that we're doing for ourselves and grief? And I definitely don't spend enough time thinking about grief, because I think we're good at stuffing that down. Tasha, I see you percolating over there.
No, indeed. I think for me it's more around talking. I think it's important to talk about these things. I love what Tré spoke about with regards to grief and regulating oneself. Sometimes I can find myself from 0 to 10, and it's sometimes when I've spoken to somebody I've realised, okay, there's different perspectives here. And maybe in talking more and finding circles where you can talk to other people of like-minded and even sometimes different minds, you get to regulate yourself even better as well. I found with COVID, and that's, I don't think we're out of COVID yet, as you mentioned. COVID was a big shift in the growth for our kids, but also for us, because we've never gone through that before. All of a sudden, we're all now scientists. We now know, we all know science since COVID. Like, I know how to diagnose.
Yeah, I learned more about spit from COVID than ever, like saliva and how you spread a virus, than I ever needed to know. And breathing. No, I don't. We know way too much about respiratory.
I am a scientist now.
Yeah, totally.
Don't tell me nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think 2 years ago, was it last year, my last internship, I worked in San Francisco High School in the elementary, and we spoke about the fact that COVID affected students, and since we're talking about adults, not much is said about how it affected teachers. It was I felt working in those schools, it was very glossed over. These are teachers that, not backing all teachers, don't get me wrong, but these are teachers that they taught through screens to children for 2 years. And then these children come back with all their emotions and feelings and grief for some as well, and loss and missing out for 2 years of education back into a classroom with teachers who did not have to be in the classroom with kids. And these teachers not knowing how to deal with the emotions the feelings, the hurt, the pain, the confusion that these children are coming in with, and not being trained to do so either, because this is all new, uncharted grounds.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then what then happens is these adults who are responsible for our children, some have the love to be able to manage it, and some just inflict their own pain on these children, and these children come back home to us. And it's a vicious cycle. So I think more space where adults that are looking after our kids and adults or parents can actually communicate and talk more about how these things are actually affecting the children and in turn affecting us. We talk about parent and teacher communication and partnership, and how really can we work in real partnership where you can appreciate that I am the parent 24/7 at home with my kids. You are the authorized parent during school hours.
Yep.
And if we brought both our knowledges together, we can create something great for this kid. You know? So I think communication, talking, and not just listening, but really hearing what each other has to say and providing the resource or time to be able to support the children that we have in their care.
Yeah, I'm like immediately, my brain went to this conversation too that we've kind of been having, right? That I think our age group, right? Tré, you said you're 38. I just turned 40 last week. I keep talking about it because I'm obviously processing it. Which is totally fine. I'm just going to keep saying it. You know, that we are trying to acknowledge the fact, right, that our children are being raised by multiple adults.
Yep.
And that word raised is a word that used to not apply to certain environments. I think schools have always been assisting in the raising of children. We just didn't use that language to describe what happened during the school day. You went there to learn. You were going to be taught. You were a student, right? Like these words were used in schools. It wasn't like, hey, you're coming to the place where it's literally the day shift of where you are raised from 5 until 18, right? Your guardians leave you there in their care while they go do what they need to do. And that's how I think about the amount of adults who assist in raising my children. We all have different shifts. And what it makes me think about is roles, is where my brain went. And so I think that that's also something different that our children are experiencing, is they're seeing different genders, different backgrounds of people, different ages, right, coming into different roles of how they're being raised by people. Right. I think a lot about what my children are seeing in their father that is very different than what his father or my father experienced, like as a role model. Same in a mother role. I feel like I'm mothering in a different way than my mom got to mother because I'm working and I go to school and I'm not, you know what I mean? I just have different choices. So when you're talking about what you can do for yourself as an adult, I think some of the ownership and understanding and looking at your roles is important to like pay attention to that, because they have different loads, right? So like when I'm, let's just say, at work and I'm assisting in the raising of other people's children, my role is different than when I'm at home being the mother to my own kids. They both take a toll, and I have to like pay attention to when I'm in those roles, and like sometimes how the roles can like come together by accident or on purpose. But you know what I mean, like that the overlapping of what we do, because we're all in work where we're literally assisting the community too, and what we're doing for young people. So all that to say, like this around this idea or question around thinking about the roles that you play personally and professionally in, you know, taking care of babies, people, you know, youth. How are you feeling in your roles right now? Like how are you developing into your different roles? And then too, just any role modeling that you've also seen or currently experiencing that's helping you. Natasha, you want to go first this time? And we'll rotate. We'll take turns. You can process for a second. That was a large question, but thinking about that.
I think the biggest thing for me right now, I remember sharing it with you in terms of my role. I have had the opportunity to be on this earth for 40 years. Yeah?
Coming in hot with the 40.
Oh, yeah, 40.
Ooh, wow.
I don't believe it for you.
I know, Tré, we look good. It's called hydration and some good skin. You know, it's also that little mixed brown color. It does.
It don't crack.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The hair is a different story. I got a nice gray streak coming in hot, and I'm into it. Sorry, Natasha. Go ahead.
I'm at a point right now where my main priority, seeing where the world is going, is my kids. I'm wondering how, when they see things on the news, how it's affecting them. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering whether what I'm teaching them at home, and this comes from where you're having to have a good relationship with your kids. And I can't emphasize the importance of having a relationship with your kids and understanding them individually, because you can't put the same blanket on all of them. All of them are processing things through different lenses. And I think it's important that we as adults appreciate that. So when we talk about my role, I feel my role is to help them navigate the world, or support them, or hold their hand in navigating the world. And the only way I can do that is having conversations with them and having regular conversations with those who are partnering with me to look after my kids. I went through a period with my 5-year-old where I shared with you where school just didn't understand my kid. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now I've got 3 beautiful kids that are all 3 intellectually high. They've all had to move up grades when we moved here, but it was interpreted before as challenging kids. And when I first arrived in the country, I tried to work in partnership with the school to say, listen, you need to challenge my kids, because this ABC you're teaching my 5-year-old, he's reading level 7 books. This 1, 2, 3 you're doing with him, Nathan knows his times tables. Yeah. He will run rings around you. They didn't want to hear that. They thought I was one of those tiger parents who probably just ram education down my kids. No, they love to learn. Mm-hmm. So sooner or later, I started getting messages that my child is challenging. He's walking around the classroom. I'm like, what are you teaching? Oh, we're counting to 10. Nathan counts to 1,000 and backwards. Mm-hmm. You can't be teaching him to 10. I've explained this to you. So a lot of it now was trying to help Nathan to understand this, because Nathan now will come back saying he was a bad kid. Am I naughty? Am I bad? And you're not bad for knowing something. Yeah. You know, if anything, you should be encouraged to grow more, you know. So all of a sudden, this 4-year-old then, who was in kindergarten, was being told that he was naughty, he was bad, put your hand down, don't put your hand up in class because you should give other children a chance. I get it. But then I'm now having to teach the school how they could be inclusive. Like, how do you include such a child that's gifted? Like, I'm not the teacher here. And then when you step on their toes and say, listen, this is what I do, it's like, I'm the teacher. I'm like, well, I've given you the opportunity to be the parent in school that has been trained in this area. And when I come in now to offer advice, you don't want to hear it. Yeah. But this is what works at home for my kid. I am the parent at home. Let me teach you what I know so you can parent him better at school. Mm-hmm. And if there's something you're doing at school that does well for him too, tell me too. Yeah. But we're in this together. So my role right now, just using him as an example, and even with my other kids, is to help my kids navigate this world that they're in right now, navigate what they're being taught at school. I've had my 9-year-old say something to me in the car when I'm driving, like, Mum, what does this mean? I'm like, what?
Yeah.
When did you start talking about that? Yeah. You know? Oh, they said it at school, you know? And the importance of letting me know as a parent that you're going to touch these topics at school so that I can prepare my child. Not that I want
or
to
prepare myself.
Exactly.
I just prepare myself for the conversation. Prepare myself. Yeah.
Just some things that I just feel, no, just give me a heads up, because at the end of the day, I'm going to pick up these pieces at home, Not that I'm going to disagree with you, but I need to be able to work with you to make sure that, and some adults in certain settings know how to load things on children, but you don't know how these children receive it. I can tell you how my child will receive something you said. But because you load it on all the children doesn't mean that each child receives it the same. Right. So I can be prepared to say, okay, Nathan's coming home with this information. We're going to have to sit down and talk about this. So on a level that he understands and he can appreciate. Yeah. So helping my kids, my role, going back to it, is helping my kids navigate the world that they're in right now. That's how I feel.
I want to sing 3 rap songs. I'm over here Navigator. What's up? Yeah. Mount up. Sorry. I'm just this is the way it feels, right? Because that's what it is. Right, you know what I mean? If you're going to help facilitate that, there is a mounting up. You are trying to figure out where to do that, how to do it, when to step forward, when to step back. There's a dance that happens there, and it immediately made me want to make a rap song called Mama Navigator. I'm gonna marinate on those lyrics. Sorry, because it's a thing that I think that is new. Where I think about our parents, they had the opposite. It was do it yourself. Figure it out. At least I can speak for at least my parents. There was a ton of autonomy, right? You know what I mean? Kids would go outside all day. No one knew where they were. Nobody knew who they were with. There was no GPS on them, right? There was a different kind of laissez-faire kind of parenting that happened because they had to, right? They were working, they were doing things or whatever. So the kids had to navigate more on their own. I'm not hating on that. I just think it's a different way of being involved. And then their parents, at least my parents were involved mainly through school and sports were kind of their way of being involved in their life. But everything else that was going on, my dad and my mom would always joke, our parents didn't talk. We didn't do a lot of processing, the navigating. It was more, come talk to me if you need something, and you figured stuff out on your own. So that is a different, I would say, layer of work that we're doing now, assisting in the navigating of growing up and trying to figure that out. It's a lot of responsibility. And I think about the things where that might be an interesting thing to think about, how the systems that care for our kids could give us stuff. I would love a daily heads up. You know what I mean? You send out enough parent squares. Let's be clear. I don't know anybody else about in the parent squares, but I got 3 kids in the school and I get 5,000 parent squares a day. But I would love one that just said, heads up. This went down on campus, or we talked about this in class today, or a student asked a question about this, and so we talked about this. It wouldn't even be every day. I could take it once a week, but I would love to have more communication like that. That's more important to me than what the homework packet is. Or there's a student in the class who has this going on and we're supporting that student going through this. All of those types of things, right? The partnership is super important. All right, Tré. How you feeling about your roles?
Yeah, I'm stressed. No.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm right straight in here. Trey's I'm
just
never
thinking
coming
about
back.
it.
Trey's I'm never coming back. I'm never coming back to talk about this. Stressing me out.
No, I really loved the thread of navigation that you brought in, Natasha. Just thinking about that, and I think there's so much running through my mind right now. So I'm gonna try to keep it rein it in. But I think one thing I want to name too in terms of thinking about roles that I forgot to name and earlier on was just that I'm coming from a blended family too, right? So I'm raising kids too that are not biological, right, per se. And I think that is just as valid, right? It's just as valid. And culturally too, for many of us from various places around the world, that it is just as valid, right? Like we come from understandings that our community raises children, right? And I was raised too, where close friends of our family were your aunties, your uncles, your tios, your tias, and they had every right to discipline you too, right? So that was a different time.
I sure did. It's a community
That was a different time too.
Yeah, well,
but and I'm still in a community like that too, in different ways. But that being said, in terms of thinking about roles, there are some discrepancies there. It doesn't undermine the validity of it, but there are discrepancies there where the bottom line or final calls that can be made, I have to take a step back at certain times too, right? So I'm learning my place in that as time goes on through each stage of their life as well. But along the thread of navigation, I think one thing I really is alive for me right now, and hearing y'all's stories and experiences too with schools, is that we're navigating many schools, right? And we're all folks of color here, BIPOC folks, and however terms that you want to use, but people of the global majority, they're calling it now. Many schools here are staffed largely by white teachers, right? In this country and even in neighborhoods and areas where they're largely black and brown communities, right? And so our kids are often navigating two worlds, right? And so in terms of that navigation is really profound and powerful to me, because we're having to teach them to do what we're doing, right? Too, at the same time.
Correct.
Right? And there's a set of values that I know that there are progressive white teachers that are learning and embodying too, so I don't want to undermine that. But also at the same time, there's still this overarching mentality that, the school knows best, adults know best. And I do believe in respect and, and containers and limits for kids. I think that's absolutely important. Structure is important. But there's also this punitive mentality that comes with the old colonial mindset that we're still sifting through, and that is still impacting our kids and still harming our kids, right? And so I think it's very powerful what you said, Tasha, about that navigation, because there's places we just can't be. We're not going to be there with them. And so what tools are we providing for them to the best of our ability to use their discernment in those situations, to know how to keep themselves safe in those situations, to know how to play their cards right? Unfortunately, I hate to say that, because the systems that are in place are messed up, right? We're navigating white supremacy, we're navigating patriarchy, we're navigating all these things, but also we can't just fly off the handle, because that can have literally deadly implications, right? And so I think that navigation piece is really critical, and it's we don't want to scare them, so we're always towing the line, how do we talk about these things with you in a way that's real, but also in a way that is appropriate for your age. It's when do we have that conversation? I was sharing a story with you all early before we started recording about threats of calling the sheriff being made by school administration for our 8-year-old. And that's not a conversation that we wanted to have with him yet, per se, right? But we have to have that conversation. And other people could, from the outside, say, that's not appropriate, that's going to scare him. Well, it's already come to him, because they're already ready to do it, right? And so it's again, it's how are we preparing them to navigate these two worlds and to really uphold these values and to return to a place of love, not passivity, but a place of love. How do we continue to teach them to be excited about the world and curious and have, experience wonder in their innocence when the world wants to take that from our kids and already criminalize them at the age of 7, at 6, at whatever it might be? How do we hold that sacredness and that beauty at the same time? It's a lot, and I don't know if we always acknowledge how much we're doing.
I could say real solid in the fact that no, we are not acknowledging I would say the kind of the vastness of raising children that we have now. And I don't think necessarily that it's, I would say a more, sometimes you're oh, we have more than the generations before us. I think it's all proportional, right? So it's not, you don't want to compare what was happening in the Great Depression, let's just say, for example, to what's happening now. You gotta think what they were doing then, that was a ton for what they were doing then. And now our load is our load, and it looks like this now. It's not saying it's better or worse or easier or harder. It's just a different kind of I want to say list of things that we're responsible for than lists of previous times. But I would also argue, I'm going to write like kind of undermine what I just said. The other part is that we actually now also to have history. And we have an awareness of history that I would say in American culture is new to us. We are not the best at carrying forth our lineage in conversations around what we've got going on, where other cultures are way better at that. That's just part of what they do and how they do it. So I do think, Tré, and Natasha, like both of your points, we're not just talking about what is happening now. In order for our children to understand what is happening now, we're also talking a lot about the past. And I think that is also a different layer of raising children that I know you guys, we're supposed to be like the specialists in this. You know what I'm saying? Like, people come to us for support. And sometimes I'm still like, this is new. How do you talk about X, Y, and Z? Or how do you resource the adults so they know like what's going on and like how to do this? Because we don't have a lot of practice. And where are we supposed to go to get it? That's not on your phone. I'm not saying, you know what I'm saying? It's always helpful. I Google stuff. I send people things all the time, like resource, like boom, 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 boom. But where do you have the conversations to practice and be in community with the adults who now have our list of, I would say, of responsibilities and things that we're trying to do for young people? And we are giving examples in a very different way. Our kids are also, too, I'm just thinking about for us as the adults, I've become way more aware of what I have experienced being raised and growing up in my community now, like having a retrospective moment when being with my babies. I don't notice it I notice it some when I'm with helping other people's kids, but my own children can be like a lightning rod. It can be like, what in the absolute...
Yeah.
Oh my God. You know, I mean, these very intense moments where I'm like realizing, I hadn't thought about that in maybe forever, or, this is now in a different light than I thought about it before, because you have sometimes literal examples of yourself, which is also weird, it's just super weird. And so I've been thinking a lot about that. Like, so when you all, speaking of like the history, right, and that we carry that with us, what do you think are some things that, you've noticed about your lineage or your family's history that is current and in your parenting and raising of kids? Like, what are some things that you're bringing to your, like, literally your practice as a child raiser that you feel is of use to you, that you're leaning into, that maybe provides some type of comfort and support? And then maybe what is something that you're noticing that you're actively trying to not put on your kids? Just a light question for a Wednesday morning let's talk about our lovely raising baggage that we bring to it. I'll start first. So the part that I am leaning way more into is how to support my children in explaining their family. I didn't really realize as a kid how often I had to explain my family to people. I was asked a lot if I was adopted, and that's because my dad was our primary caregiver, and he's a white guy with brown hair, blue eyes. He actually looks a lot like the new Prince Eric in the Ariel movie. That was a weird realization this weekend. I was like, wow, that looks a lot like my dad. For reals. Just putting it out there. A little shout out to my dad. And he was walking around with 3 brown girls. And my mom, African-American, super dark, but she wasn't in the picture as often day to day. And so I was constantly having to explain the dynamics of my family. And my dad and they did a really good job of supporting me. Well, like, answer the question how you like to answer it. do your best to be polite, though, right? Because I'm a kid, and you need to be respectful to the adult. And now I'm watching my own kids having to do and navigate the same questions, right? For example, now we get asked out when we're out a lot. Sometimes, like, if I'm the nanny, if I'm the babysitter, I'm like, actually, I wish that I could, like, sometimes clock out and drop them off somewhere, but that's not really what I get to do. Nope. I'm there. No, I ain't get paid. I ain't get paid. Not in money. Nope. I'm their mom, and I'm thinking a lot about, like, leaning into this, like, how was I supported to talk about our families? And I think that that's a skill that we're going to need to get better at with our young people, of how they want to tell their story. And so that's something I'm leaning into, is, like, helping them each kind of figure out how they want to do that. The part that I'm wanting to make sure I don't bring into that conversation is always having to be compliant or obedient, or sometimes to just even tone, right? Like, if somebody does something that's not okay, you should be able to say that it's not okay. Absolutely. And I didn't grow up necessarily with that feeling. It doesn't mean I don't think anybody wanted me to be uncomfortable, but I didn't feel like I was allowed to say, like, that's not okay. So I'm always pumped when we're out, and one of my kids, my daughter Brielle, who is straight fire, who somebody will say something like that, and she'll be like, that's actually a really rude assumption for you to make about someone. You should ask a different question. And I'm like, yeah, okay. What she said. You know what I mean? But, like, so it's just to see it, right? Like, I'm like, oh, okay, it's working. I'm not, she's given some fire, and she's given some sass, and she is kind of putting an adult on blast. But that's something that I'm happy to see, that I'm not doing that to them. It's very, very hard, because I want to be like, oh my gosh, don't be rude. Because that's what my gut tells me to do when she behaves that way. But I'm like, she's actually not being rude. She's speaking some truth. So that's an example of, like, something that I'm doing right now. Anybody else? What you got, guys?
I think for me, coming from my kids have had the opportunity of having a background that's Nigerian. We eat Nigerian food. We love Nigerian fashion. We love our Afro beats. Anything Afro is just in your bones, It's nice. Then we're British as well, so they were born in Britain. And then we come to the US. And what I'm trying to help, we're having a lot of discussions about, is different cultures. Like, what's acceptable in the UK may not be acceptable in the US. And what you thought you understood about being a young black kid is very different about being a young black kid here in the US. And I'll give you a classic example where I'm talking to my 12-year-old right now. My eldest started middle school, and she got talking to one of her friends that's African-American. And the first question she asked, and this is her being innocent, where do you come from? It's a genuine question. The girl said, I'm African-American. Where do you come from? Now, this is my daughter coming from a background where she knows she's Nigerian. I'm Yoruba by tribe. My husband is Igbo by tribe. We speak two different languages. She was brought up in Britain. She's very much British as well. And we've come to America. Now, she wasn't asking an offensive question. No. Whereas some people around her thought she was being offensive. She was asking a genuine question that, where do you come from? In the UK, when you tick the boxes, are you African? Are you Caribbean? Are you Italian, Hispanic? Are you here? Your boxes are very limited. It doesn't acknowledge. It is. It doesn't acknowledge the fact that not everybody is African American. That you've probably come from the Caribbean. You could have come from Ghana. You could have come from Nigeria. So she's asking a very genuine question that some people around her told her off for, that, oh, you're being racist. And she's like, no, I genuinely want to know that, for instance, I'm Nigerian. So we're having these talks right now because we're coming from a place now where you could speak freely about where you're from back at home without being offensive. Oh, you're black. You speak patois. You're from Jamaica. Oh, no, you know. Whereas here, you could offend people. And we're realizing now that you have to be careful how you talk and to be respectful of the journey people have come from. Yeah. Mm-hmm. She didn't know much about the journey that some people are coming from. Yeah. So we're having those kind of talks now around that. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about different, what am I helping my children to understand right now? I'm helping them to understand that where you're the majority in Nigeria, because we come here and you hear things on the news, and my daughter's like, Mum, why are they shooting people? Why is this happening? Why are these black kids and blah, blah, blah? I'm like, Jiraiya, it's a totally different system here. Mm-hmm. I said, you may see, black and brown people as the minority here in certain places, but if you go to Nigeria, you're the majority. It's a matter of where you are. Yep. You're never a minority everywhere. Yeah. It just depends on where people have moved, So it's having these kind of discussions with my kids that, I'm sorry, I've never spoken about race as much just since I've moved to the US.
Ooh, goodness.
I'm just going to drop that there. I haven't. I've had to talk about it. Yeah. I've had to address points with my daughter where someone's called her a monkey in class, and she's never experienced that before, And I've had to go to school a few times regarding things like this that I've never experienced in 40 years, And I've been there for 40 years, yeah. So there's certain topics I'm having to talk about right now that I didn't have.
It's all right. You're about to pound that table. I was getting ready. Getting ready. Yeah.
Gotta do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That I never had growing up. Mm-hmm. And I'm having to help them to understand that. Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to pause. I'm just going to say, because it's where do you come from is an interesting question, because that also means that sometimes I wonder, right, talking about history, it's a really great question because we all come from all sorts of different places, and how are young people being empowered to know that about themselves? Mm-hmm. So even to say, I'm African American, well, what does that mean? Mm. And that, I'm sure, sweet, kind, young woman doesn't know the answer to that question.
Which she didn't.
And that's like, okay, and that's, that is what it is. Mm-hmm. It's just, that's an interesting idea too around this, the responsibility we now have in raising kids around identity development. And what do words and labels mean in the U.S. and how do you want them to define you? Yeah, I don't know how many, I know there's some books and some things on that, but that's a different layer, right, too, that we're also trying to figure out and support, because they've got a lot of choices. So many choices. The boxes, not so much. We've got to work on the boxes. But culturally and community speaking, they have more choice than at least I had when I think about growing up, like in terms of labels. We didn't have as many labels to pick from, but it's challenging, right? Our young people are going to be growing up needing to have a broader understanding of what words mean or what they could mean, and that's new to the United States. I would agree that's particular to us. We're very good at being binary, and we want the shortest amount of boxes possible. And so you're right. That's new around how we're gonna do that. Ooh, I'm almost pounded the table too, Natasha. I'm just gonna cross my arms. All right, go ahead, Tré.
Man, so much to say about that too. Just like the construct of race in this country too, and how it's shifted and changed over time, and very intentionally robbed people of an understanding of origin too, for people of diaspora too, and all the ways. So I was just thinking about that. So much. And I think for me, maybe taking a little bit of a different direction, but I think for me, thinking about what to include and what to maybe push up on, man, there's so much. I was like, I can think about all the things I'm not trying to do.
We're just talking for an hour today. We can get deeper into our baggage at a different time, but just, the short list.
Something about this thought therapy office.
Yeah, it's right. It does. There's a vibe. I know. I'm sorry, taking you on a little bit of a journey here. Yeah, let me tell you about what do you want to, what do you want to pass on and what do you want to not pass on, It's a tough conversation.
Yeah, I think the beautiful part and what I often think about with my parents and and how hard they worked. You know, I came up in a working class family. My parents were food service workers. You know, they met at my dad was a cook, my mom was a waitress, and that's how they fell in love. And you know, they struggled. You know, they really did. And in other ways, I had privilege. You know, they both spoke English. You know, and they were able to work. They had citizenship and these types of things. So there was a privilege of that. But we definitely grew up working class, and they scraped by to get us to where we could get. We were 3 kids as well. My dad sometimes would commute up to 6 hours a day. You know, to get to work. You know, and work out there and on the phone wires and all that, and come drive another 3 hours home, you know. And so I think about that, and he started to open up and tell me more stories now that I'm a parent, you know, that he hadn't shared before. It's like, I remember when I used to have to do this and that, and my dad was kind of a tyrant, you know, for real. Like, we say it now.
He was tired.
He was tired. He was grouchy, and, you know, but
Dude was tired.
and now, of course, they're like,
him.
Yep.
like many of our parents, they're so sweet to their grandkids, and you're like, what?
Yeah, it's called sleep, Tré. Okay, it's called rest. They also get to eat and go to the bathroom when they need to.
Right.
They're different humans.
And there's a softening too.
Yeah,
I think,
there
you know,
is.
that comes with age. But I think that's that beauty that I saw them make them sacrifices, you know, and give what they could, you know. And at the same time, like you were talking about, they weren't able to really talk about things, and they didn't come from that generation of talking. My mom had, you know, come up in the juvenile justice system as a young person, right, as 11, and then they sent her to Catholic boarding school, and so she grew up in a harsh environment, as well as my dad. At that time, the schools hit kids, teachers hit kids, they disciplined kids, right, and so when I think about what I want to give, it's to thinking about everything that they couldn't do. What can I give from that point, from what they carried the torch this far? How do we then take that and give to our kids, you know, what they weren't able to, right? And I think that they've talked to me about it, like, do it better than I did. You know, that's what we came this far so that you could do it. You could take it forward. And I think that's what it is for me. Now, the fine line for me now is, how do we not spoil our kids, right? Because, you know, now they all got devices and they got screens and they don't even know what it's like to be hungry, you know? And I'm so happy and grateful that they don't have to experience that. The other day I was folding laundry and there was a belt on the couch, my belt. I had left it there. And I looked at that belt and I was like, they're never going to know what it's like to feel triggered when they see that. Because I triggered myself. I saw my own belt and I was like, oh shit. You know, I got that like fear of God in my spine, you know?
Yeah, they're never going to know.
And I was thinking, I was tripping out on it. I was like, man, they're never going to know what that's like to see that. Those instruments of discipline and feel afraid, you know, and I'm glad for that because we have different ways to discipline now, and maybe some of it, you know, maybe we could tighten it up. I don't know, you know, like we're always learning and growing, but I think that's what it is for me, is that it's like going back to those roles. It's like, do what, you know, they brought us this far, so do it better than what they could do. And they didn't have those tools and resources. You know, my parents they weren't sitting here talking with other parents and, you know, able to go to therapy or all these different things. It wasn't that way then. They didn't have those resources financially, but also it wasn't as normalized as it is now. And so I think for me, it's like, if I have access to these things, then I need to utilize them, you know, and not just carry out their cycles of trauma that they came from, you know. So
yeah, it is that balance. It is. Yeah, I mean, you're they do not know what it's like to be hungry. Like, you know, they don't know anything about belts. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where sometimes
a slipper.
Or the
my mum used to aim me from the bottom of the stairs at the back of my head
with the slipper.
She always got it. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, you know, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. And I think that's a really good way to kind of, because these are really important conversations that need to be continued. But I also think too, like, that's a good reminder that we're doing a lot. And I think a lot of times we don't give ourselves enough just credit or, you know, appreciation. I know that word sometimes feels fluff. Like, we were joking when we started, this says like one day at a time on the front of this box, but like we don't give ourselves just enough, like, hey, like we are making important changes and differences in the way that we're working and raising and caring for young people. Like, we as adults are doing a lot. I'm with you all that I'm just wishing that we can continue to take it up a notch in terms of how we're going to sustain what it is that we're being asked to carry and do. Because I do think we are definitely at a time where coming back to community and support and conversation is going to be incredibly important, because there is a lot of new stuff. Things are new. And that requires processing and like thinking about the consequences maybe of some of the things that we're doing or that we're not doing. And that's really important. It's really important that we get to talk about it. And I don't know if we are doing that enough. And so that's why when these holidays roll around, about how to appreciate the people who are in these roles with these titles and these labels, what is it going to look like for us, right? Like I'm over here being like, can we just have one day where we like just give a shout out to people who are raising young people? Like, do we need, like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what we would call it. Maybe like, we kept you alive, we love you day, you know? Like, I don't know. But like, you know what I mean? Just this idea right around it changing, right? Like that who is doing the work or how they're doing it or how we're loving on ourselves and young people, it's looking different, and we're choosing to have it look different. And so I just very much like appreciate the two of you having this type of conversation, because I think we're talking about things that need more conversation, and we as adults need a place where we can kind of digest and think about what it is that we're doing, how much we're doing, and how we're going to continue to do it, and who we need on our team. You know, I think it's really important that we lean onto that. I'm definitely going to ship some of my children to your guys' houses. Yeah. I'm happy to swap.
Likewise.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I just think about that. I'm already like, Brielle does need to hang out with Natasha. You know what I'm saying? I'm thinking about that. And I think, you know what I mean? Like, And you know what I mean? I'm just thinking about people too, right? Like, we have people in our corners that we can share. And I think that that's super important, that we start leaning more into that, because you're not supposed to do it all by yourselves. So I'm keeping track of our amazing time together, and I really appreciate both of you being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Likewise, thank you.
You've been listening to Key to the Bridge, a podcast brought to you by your friends at Keystone Therapy and Training Services. I'm your host, Erica Bosque. Key to the Bridge is recorded and produced by Jeff Henderson and Brian Henderson. This is a podcast for everyone.